reason is the around the fact that FGC is increasingly recognised as a gender equality issue. This is reflected in its inclusion under SDG 5, the recent Generation Equality Forum as targets under Action Coalition 1 on GBV and Action Coalition 3 on SRHR, and the UN-EU Spotlight initiative to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls. But in practice, FGC is still really treated as a silo issue, and programs to end the practice don't do enough to address the harmful gender norms that has led to and perpetuate the practice. Secondly, we've seen the devastating impact of COVID on the rates of violence against women and girls, including the increase in FGC. It's estimated that 2 million more women and girls are at risk of being cut as a result of the pandemic. And this has meant that more urgency and new approaches are required if we're to get ahead and see a marked reduction in prevalence rates by 2030. So our aim with this policy discussion paper, as the name suggests, is to spark discussion, debate, and ideas on ways forward on how to address harmful gender norms at multiple levels for an accelerated end to FGC. So at this point, I'm really excited and pleased to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Anne-Marie Middelberg, who's joining us today from the Netherlands. Anne-Marie is the researcher and author of this policy dialogue paper. She's a human rights, gender and FGC expert and the founder and director of Middelberg Human Rights Law Consultancy. Welcome, Anne-Marie, I'm so happy to see you. So in developing this paper, you explored evidence of the success of gender transformative approaches in other areas and the lessons that could potentially be applied to FGC. Yeah. Could you give us an overview of the key findings from the paper?
Yeah, of course, I would be more than happy to. So thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here today. I'm actually still with maternity leave, but writing this paper was so exciting, and I'm very, very happy that we have the launch today. And I'm also very pleased to share with you the main findings of the research that we conducted. Now, when I was doing the research, I really was happy to find out that gender transformative change in gender relations has been on the development agenda for more than 4 decades. So it's a new word, it's a new thing in our FGM or FGC world. But when I did my research on gender transformative change, on gender transformative approaches, I found out that in other sectors, they have been implementing projects having this approach for more than 4 decades. So I think it's good to also keep that in mind. And in the paper, you will see 3 examples of empirical research with evidence that those gender transformative approaches in those sectors worked. There's one example on the fisheries sector, one example on the HIV prevention sector, and one example on intimate partner violence, where gender transformative approaches have been implemented and proved to be successful. So that's very exciting. One of the key learnings is that multi-level approaches, and you already saw it in the short clip, are more effective. So interventions that work simultaneously on different levels. So also that I think that applies in general, but especially in relation to gender transformative change, you need to work on all the different levels. And I think the socio-ecological model is already included in many theories of change, in many strategies. And this is also something that came out of this research. Another key learning is that the intersectional perspective is needed. So we should address the links between gender and other markers of difference, such as class, race, or age, or ethnicity, or sexual orientation. So that is also really important to keep in mind. Then another thing that is really crucial in this approach is to involve boys and men. If we want to change gender power imbalances, if we want to change or want to address the patriarchal system, it is really necessary, as research shows, to include boys and men. And this is also something that came out really clearly in the focus group discussions that we had. And finally, one of the things we need to realize is that it is a long-term strategy. So if we really go to the root causes of gender inequality, if we want to if we want to tackle that, if we want to change these power imbalances, we really need to realize that this change doesn't happen overnight, and that it is a long-term strategy. But that doesn't mean that there haven't been any successes yet, or that it is not possible to change it. But of course, it is important to realize that. So those are, I think, the 4 key learnings from this research. As Nardal said, we explored the potential of a gender transformative approach in future programs and interventions. And I really think that this paper shows that there is a lot of potential, that there is reason to adopt this approach in future programs and interventions. And I really look forward to dive deeper into it, to start a debate, because I hope that this paper, with more research, with more academic evidence, also helps us understand, first of all, what a gender transformative approach is, how it links to the human rights agenda, because FGM or FGC is a form of gender inequality. That's how it was actually in the 1990s included in the international human rights framework. And now we can have this debate on how we could, incorporate all that knowledge in future programs and interventions. So I'm very excited. I would like to thank Orchid Project again for giving me the opportunity to do this research. And I look forward to the debates and the panel discussion that we have today. Thank you so much, Nardal.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. This paper was really a labor of love. It's not an exaggeration to say that. It took many months and many revisions. So I know it's difficult to summarize the evidence, key learnings, conclusions, recommendations in a few minutes. So I'm pleased to let everyone in the audience know that the full report will be available on Orchid Project's website straight after this session. So I'm now really pleased to introduce our next speaker, Sarian Kamara. Sarian is based in London by way of Sierra Leone and is the founder of Keep the Drums, Lose the Knife, which is a survivor-led organization using their own experience to educate communities on ending FGC and other forms of violence in the diaspora and in Sierra Leone. Sarian, welcome. It's really good to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Great. So Anne-Marie has walked us through some of the important key findings of the research. But practically, we know that the long-term view that a gender transformative approach requires needs to be balanced with immediate needs and urgency of current programs and interventions. Furthermore, we know that there can be some disconnect between the theoretical and practical applications of this approach. So you're an Orchid Project Fellow, and you've previously been vocal in expressing that FGC continues to happen because women and men, boys and girls are not considered equal in society. Could you please speak to that a little bit more, and whether you think taking a gender transformative approach to FGC can create long-lasting impact? Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, Nardal. And thanks again for giving us this platform and creating this space for we to have this discussion. Yes, thank you guys, everyone, for coming on board and taking your time to come and be part of this discussion. I first of all want to say I totally agree with Anne-Marie's findings and recommendation, because gender transformative, it is very, very vital in the work that we do. But one thing for me, I want to point out is for people not to misunderstand gender transformative to be right for women and girls only, because it can be easily be translated into that. Like to say, oh, because girls are kind of like at the bottom across these communities. So we're trying to kind of like give women their rights and then forget about men and boys. That's the angle I've always come from. Like, for we to be able to level the ground for everybody, that's what gender transformative is about. And in our work, how do we use gender transformative? We use gender transformative through the lens of the UNICEF 6 elements of change, because you have to have collective choice. to kind of like achieve this. And you want to have community exchange as well, you know, because it's very important for communities to know that this and this is happening. Let's not forget that across these communities, this is the norm, you know, it's the way people are expected to behave in our communities. Men, that's how everything is structured. Men to be at the top, boys to be, you know, right at the top, and girls and women at the bottom. So what we're trying to do, you know, a big example, I must say this before I forgot. Today in Sierra Leone, the let me remind myself, the Ministry of Gender is bringing a bill to the House of Parliament in Sierra Leone in terms of gender empowerment, you know, which is a big milestone. As you know, a lot of activists like ourselves and other leading organizations have been working on this issue. We're still a long way, but I think we're very, very close. We're getting there, and the message is very clear. One thing I want to say, we have to be very clear in our messaging, and we have to break it down to the understanding of communities when we engage them, so that they get to understand what are all this meaning, you know, like the basic human rights, how to enable environments to see, for enough people to see change in a non-judgmental, open dialogue way. It is very, very important. So for we use all of these elements, which is from the UNICEF 6 elements of change, to empower community, to bring along all sectors, all parts, because just like Anne-Marie says, it does take time to achieve these results. And it needs patience, because you're going into someone's community that is already been set up with one system. And that's the way everybody operates within that. The man at the top, the woman at the bottom, men making decisions, women follow. In some gathering, women are not even allowed to speak, you know. So those are the kind of like, we need to kind of like create those space and avenue for open dialogue and open discussion, for we to be able to understand, and for community to also understand where we as activists going into this community, where we're coming from, so they know we're not going there to tell them how to live their life. We're not going there to rewrite their cultural values and their beliefs, you know. So it is very, very complex, just like Anne-Marie says. But like she said again, it is very important for we to involve men and boys. This is why for we at Keep the Drums, Loose the Knife, we are a survivor-led, but we have more men on the ground in Sierra Leone working with us at the forefront. Why? Because we have long since recognized the importance of men and boys in addressing harmful practices such as FGC. And we all know, because we're not going to go into why FGC happened. We all know, we have the basics, why it happens. It's about control, you know. So how do we break this barrier? How do we level it down for both men and women? Because for me, working in different communities, one thing I know, men are really at the advantage side of benefiting in terms of their position within these communities. But again, those pressure that is forced on them for them to behave like a man within their community, like men and boys, i.e. not to cry, i.e. to stand strong and to prove that you are the strongest sex, you know, sometimes push them into all sorts of violence and trying to kind of like uphold that status. It can be very, very difficult for them as well. So what we're trying to do is to level the playground for all community members, so we have a good understanding of where we want to go, where we are, and where we want to go, and the reason why we're doing that. Another good example I want to say here in terms of gender transformative. Let's take example, the cutters themselves in Sierra Leone. We know them as sewers. These women are very, very powerful, you know. So even if you take away the power structure, you know, let's say take away the men, the power that's been given to men and boys. And when you come to women, squatters are very, very powerful. And other women within this community fear them, you understand? So there's no level ground. So what we do when we do our community exchange within communities, we kind of like create role plays, you know, and get everybody involved so that they can understand and look at power exchange and how it feels, like swap it round. Some of them will be at the high top where they are in control and they're in charge. And then we have an open dialogue to see how does it feel, you know, and things like that. So it's very important for me to create those spaces and have those education, bring it down to their level of understanding in terms of what we're trying to achieve and what we're aiming at. So I'm going to stop there. I really thank you for this.
Thank you. You know, I could let you talk about this for hours, but we have a short time with many voices that we need to hear. Thank you so much. Yeah. It was great to hear you talk about the importance of a gender transformative approach in creating a level playing field, and also actually highlighting the harm of gender norms to men and boys as well was really interesting, as well as, you know, really working at the community level with this, engaging in dialogue in a non-judgmental way. So that was really helpful. Thank you, Sarian. So this brings me on to our second speaker today, Mireille Tushiminina. Mireille is based in Addis Ababa, but is joining us today from New York, and she is the global coordinator of the UNFPA-UNICEF Joint Programme for the Elimination of FGM. A very warm welcome to Mireille. Thank you so much for joining us today. The Joint Programme is obviously one of the leading, if not the leading, global initiative to end FGC. And we know that phase 3 of the programme strongly incorporates the commitment to expanding a gender transformative approach to ending female genital cutting. So from your experience with the joint programme and working in this area of work, what are the lessons learned so far? Both what has worked well, what hasn't, and how can we go about putting theory into practice when it comes to a gender transformative approach to ending FGC? Over to you.
Thank you. I thought I had lost you for a few seconds. Thank you so much, Nardos. And I'm really excited to be here and joining, you know, fellow panelists and hearing, you know, Anne-Marie's and Sarian's world. I'm asking myself, you know, that we should not be afraid to ask ourselves the questions of what is gender transformative approach, and this is still a learning experience for so many, including myself. And the joint program, I appreciate that sustainably ending FGM requires a gender transformative approach. So I congratulate you, Orchid and Anne-Marie, for the amazing work. But reflecting on what Sarian said, and she uses really some strong, powerful statements and poignant words, you know, to create the space. And I'm sorry to go back to that because it's really important. And that is really what drives the work that we do and the passion that we have to really end FGM by 2030. The need to create the space to engage with community and really tackling the root causes of gender inequalities. It requires really redressing the fundamental power dynamics and structures that reinforce gender inequalities. And, you know, combined with upstream, with downstream intervention at individual, community, and institutional and policy level to challenge unequal gender power dynamic that reinforces FGM. And I do note, as you know, both Anne-Marie and Sarian stated that at the community level, it's really important. And I think we should turn that into a strong mandate to engage men and boys alongside with other community gatekeepers as advocates to initiate the increased, you know, actions for the elimination of FGM. So just a little bit, for those who are not familiar with the joint program, and just, you know, and of course, in respect to times, there's a lot of examples of initiative that showcase the effort of the joint program, and it's a joint program of UNFPA and UNICEF together for us to really jointly address FGM. And in my capacity at the global coordinator at the moment, we focus on program reach. As at the onset of this program, we started with 8 countries and now expanded to 17 countries across 2 continents, which Africa and Asia. And currently the program is executed 3 phases, and it's about to commence a new phase that we are all excited. In the new phase, the program, the joint program, is set to further expand the reach in different continents as well. We strongly support strong advocates, including government as well, government partners. It's really important for for us that some of the activities that we are implementing on the continent as well, and by continent I mean the continent of Africa, some of the program that we have launched, such as the Salima initiative, and that it has a strong undertaking of us to develop a regional level of accountability framework on harmful practices and other focus of this initiative. Among others, of course, is our contribution to knowledge database and our advocacy effort. But more importantly, what are the lessons learned, especially in time of COVID? The COVID pandemic and the mitigative measures adopted across countries, especially those with high prevalence rate of FGM, resulted in deepening gender inequality, and lockdowns and stay-at-home measures largely undermine prevention, protections, and support services for girls and women at risk of or survivors of FGM. In some cases, the pandemic was reported to have increased cross-border FGM. And on the other hand, the lack of access of services and restrictions of movement of person led to a reduction in medicalization of FGM rate in some countries where the joint program implemented. And for instance, in Nigeria, and in respect to a participant that might be from Nigeria, where healthcare providers carry out 12.7% of FGM, organizations noted that the lockdown orders and restrictions on the movement had prevented family across Enugu State for traveling to clinic and or health facilities to perform FGM. And of course, we have the medicalization and the cross-border FGM, and a need for adaptive programming. And I hear, really, Sarian, what you emphasize of really sometimes simplifying some of our approaches in the community level. And I can reassure you, it's also one of the top priority for the next phase. And also bear in mind some of the areas where we work with the humanitarian crisis. It's really calling us to review how we are operating in some of this part of area. So part of the continent. In the interest of time, the joint program recently launched our annual report, which features 6 reports that captured the experience of the joint program and partners in preventing, mitigating, and responding to the increase of the risk of FGM during COVID pandemic, which I would recommend anyone to go to our website, both UNFPA and UNICEF, to read some of the reports on the performance reports, which provides an analysis of the joint program results, the case studies, the numerous case studies, and the data that we are presenting in all the 17 countries. And some of the case studies provide socioeconomic and political context, which include the potential impact of COVID-19 and on global effort to achieve SDG 5, target 5.3, of course, as well as country-specific program, along with COVID-19 cases studies and a gender equitable masculinity in eliminating female genital mutilation, which really highlight promising practices and programs result in engaging men and boys as allies in promoting gender transformative approaches to preventing and responding to girls and women heightened risk of FGM. But lastly, and really wanted to commend you guys and Orchid Project and Anne-Marie, and we are really excited for the new strategic phase, which of course will enable us to go beyond theory, to really learn from all the lessons from the past and really know how to implement them. And of course, it will be driven through engagement in engaging in purposeful partnership, with multi-layered action. And I believe that through that, the joint program will be able to achieve our desired impact of really delivering the global promise of ending FGM by 2030. I know it is a long-term desire, and I hear Anne-Marie really when she was breaking down on the gender transformative approach that this has been some of the theory over 3 or 4 decades ago, but we're just really grateful that creating this space I'm hoping that will emerge a new, a more equitable social norms transformative of transforming all harmful practices that drive FGM and gender inequality. So I'm really looking forward of reading the whole report, and hopefully together we'll be able to go beyond the theory and maybe move to the next step of implementing them globally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mireille. It is so wonderful to hear about the next phase of the joint program and how it will be expanding. It's also really interesting to hear so many organizations, no matter their size, have had to pivot in response to the impact of COVID and how that's compounding the underpinning gender norms. So it was really interesting to hear you speak about that from the perspective of the UN Joint Programme. So as you mentioned, last month, the Joint Programme released its 2020 annual report. I would encourage everyone to have a look at it. It has a heavy feature of the report was the emphasis on working with men and boys as part of a gender transformative approach to ending FGC. So I'd like to, at this point, welcome Amos Leuka. Amos, are you there? Amos is there. Amos is joining us from Narok County in Kenya today. He is the project manager with Safe Kenya, which is a close partner of the Orchid project. And Safe's focus is on community level interventions to end FGC. So Amos, welcome. It's so good to have you here. So we know from speaking to Sarian, from hearing from Mireille, from the key findings that Anne-Marie gave us, that working closely with men and boys is a critical part of tackling gender norms. But sometimes it's unclear on how we do this. Part of Safe's critical work is working with men and boys. It's what you do every day. So what has been your experience and the experience of Safe Kenya more generally in working with men and boys to tackle gender norms to end FGC? Over to you.
Thank you, Nados and everyone for having me here and for this opportunity. And as he said, I'm Amos Leuka from Safe Kenya, project manager, an office based in Leuka Hills, Narok County. And as he said, we are working with men, women, youth, and both boys and girls. And our approach is that we carry out workshops. We do workshop for men and workshop for women. And we also do joint workshop where we bring women and men in a same space to discuss the issues affecting them, particularly on FGC. Because if you try to see that time where men say this is a women issue, and when it bring onto the table, they discuss and they found that this is a community issue where it involves both men and women. We also bring critical gatekeepers like cultural leaders on board. We have a number of cultural leaders meeting, workshops, and also opinion women leaders who come together to discuss on how to find out a collective shift for the community, which is adapted and blessed by the whole community members. So with that, the workshop create debate and give people an opportunity to discuss on how FGC affect women and girls. In our work also, we also have a performance where we perform to a general audience. We sing in markets, we visit community where we have a joint audience for men and women. And in this, we create discussion on how we can address this. We have a play where you see people discussing how this issue is affecting the community. And again, during the COVID-19 period where we have the pandemic, we are not able to get or go to bigger audience, but we are able to approach the youth, boys and girls individually, and also we join them together to create discussion on how can we abandon FGC collectively as a community. So one of our focus is to see that the process of abandonment will be won by the community. So we are facilitating the process on how the community can adapt a more non-harmful way of promotion of girls, which is approved by both men, women, young boys, girls, and all of them see this as their own issues and not something being pushed by outside forces. Okay, in this work, that is how we do our work. We move to people. One of our policies is we go to the people, not people coming to us. So we define our way working of one-on-one intervention, and we have an outreach team where we move to various locations, and then we facilitate their transport and also the way they run their workshop. Sometimes we even run our workshop under the tree if we have no room, so that we confirm our policy of moving to the people. We have achieved.
Sorry, Amos, if I can jump in quickly, because it's a very critical question that I wanted to ask you related to what you've just said. I apologize sincerely for interrupting, but I think it's really important. So you've spoken about all this amazing work that SAFE does. So you do the workshops, you get critical gatekeepers on board, you use performance as discussion, but we know that the roles of men and women in our communities are really entrenched. So what has been the response that you've had, particularly from men and boys, in wanting to discuss changing the gender norms and changing the roles? What has that been like? If you could do it in 1 minute, please.
Okay, thank you so much. As you know, and as I agree with my colleague Sarian, who said that we are in a patriarchal society where men control many decision making. So in this case, we are able to lay a platform where we bring together more than 70 community leaders, men and women, who have seated and discussed about the right approach or what alternative rite of passage, which has been approved by the Leuka Council of Elders, both women and men together. So in this, they have agreed that we have different roles, but men have accepted that even women play a critical role in running the society issues, not only on issues of FGC, but even on issues of community. For a good example is the inclusion of women register in land, inclusion of women in land ownership register. In the 5 section of Leuka where we work, that land adjudication is going on, and it happened the first time in Kenya that women are included in the land ownership register, and the Leuka cultural leaders have accepted that and see it is an opportunity to hold land so that women will also be part of holding this very vital property for their families. This also is an important issue because even if there's family where we have girls and they also accept that even they are going to inherit their property. So this is, we can say, an achievement for our organization, because Save Ma or Save Kenya is very instrumental in advocating for that. And we have also faced a number of challenges, because bringing these people to understand this, and given that there are issues that are specifically meant for men, especially cultural issues, there are also other leaders who really believe, how can we achieve this? So it is also costly, and it costs time and money to reach all these people, and also to make sure that they understand and give a live example on what the women have done to make sure that their community is doing to do the right thing for their community. So it's not easy, that we are said, but if you go practically to the field, that is when you feel that, yes, these things are really there. But lucky, the men are understanding, and we are feeling that the gap is becoming narrow as compared to when we have started this work. So thank you so much, and you're welcome for any question.
Amos, thank you so much. I mean, I'm always amazed by the work of SAFE and the work that you do at the community level. And it's really interesting to hear about the creative ways in which you try to engage different members of the community. I think so many of these discussions around ending FGC, around the gender transformative approach, they happen in silos at different levels of practice and implementation. So it's really important and valuable to hear your community experience juxtaposed with other levels like the UN joint program. So thank you so much. Amos, if I could just ask you to just mute yourself now so I can introduce the next speaker. Thank you so much. So I'd like to pivot a little bit now and explore another level of practice. I'm really pleased to introduce Emily Todd, who joins us today from Scotland. Emily is a policy advisor within the SRHR team at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK government. Emily, welcome, and thank you for joining us. So we've heard from Sarian, Mireille and Amos about the challenges and opportunities of a gender transformative approach to ending FGC from the positions of the diaspora and community education, a global initiative, and a community-based organising respectively. Of course, the UK government has expressed its support to ending female genital cutting globally and for women and girls more generally. So my question to you is, from a donor perspective, from your experience with FCDO, what lessons can governments learn, and how can governments practically challenge gender norms through their programs to end FGC? Over to you.
Great, thanks Nardos. It's a great question, and I guess challenging gender norms is at the heart of our approach in FCDO to supporting efforts to end FGM. And we're continually keen to learn how to do it better. And so I'm really pleased, first of all, to see this briefing that's come out today, but also to be part of this panel and to hear from other speakers. So our overarching approach then is underpinned by the government's strategic vision for gender equality. And this outlines 5 key pillars. So it focuses on women's political empowerment, economic empowerment, sexual and reproductive health and rights, girls' education, and ending violence against women and girls. And within this, we take the view that we won't achieve gender equality without ending FGM, as it is one of the most extreme ways in which women and girls are controlled. So I think to best kind of respond to your question, I'd like to focus on the approach we're taking at the moment. And many of you will be familiar with the second phase of our support to efforts to end FGM, which is grounded in, again, in the belief that it's one of the most extreme manifestations of violence against women and girls, and that it's held in place by these gender and social norms. And that while we know that changing norms is extremely difficult and it does take time, we now do have more and more evidence around the kind of support that can be effective at changing both attitudes and behaviour around FGM. And it's important then, as donors, that interventions we support recognise FGM as a social norm, and that changes in behaviour around it require a change in social attitudes and the creation then of new positive norms. And we also know in our approach that change must be led from within affected communities and countries if it's to be effective and sustainable. And that these are the best people, the people best placed to be able to understand social norms, what and who holds these in place, and then how they can be shifted. Now, we've also got evidence that having the right laws and policy in place and that media and campaigns can help support community-led attitude and behaviour change, and that legislation and policy are critical to creating that enabling environment for social norms to change, but that they have to be part of a multi-pronged approach, and that ultimately that needs the community-led change at its heart. And that's why it's really important then, I think, to hear the points that we've just had from Sarian on creating spaces within communities for that discussion, and Amos on recognising who the gatekeepers are, as well as the importance of working with men and boys. And so as a donor and as a government partner, it's then our role to use this evidence and to find practical ways to support those who are leading the change and who are telling us the best ways in which we can support change to happen. So through our current investment, we are aiming to build on this evidence and aiming to accelerate positive change in social attitudes. We're supporting the Africa-led movement to end FGM, and this is taking that multi-pronged approach at different levels that you just mentioned there, Nadas. It's, we're working through the UN Joint Programme, and it was great to hear from my colleague Mireille there today, and with WHO on their work with health systems, as well as designing interventions that we've been co-creating with our partners. Some of you are on the call today, which is fantastic, as well as with activists and communities to respond directly to those local contexts, including working with and identifying grassroots organisations and women-led organisations. And this itself is grounded in a theory of change that has the girl at the centre of the approach. And we've supported through this design process political economy analysis that is helping us to understand a bit more about the power dynamics. And I think this relates to Amos's point around understanding the gatekeepers, looking at what it is that's holding these social norms in place. We're also looking at how we can integrate our learnings around what works to end FGM into other sectoral work. And for us, this means working with colleagues in the health and education sectors in particular, as well as continuing to develop approaches to measure change. And there's been some outstanding work coming out on this year and looking at how we can build on that and strengthening data around it. And what's been really important for us to donate is looking at, as we're developing programs, how do we build in that flexibility so that we're continually learning and that we can shift our approaches. So I guess a final point then is that the most critical thing for us is then this listening and this learning and trying to ensure that we are taking a role that is about supporting efforts by those who are best placed to dictate what that change process should look like. We've got to keep learning and building the evidence around this. But I think we're seeing a lot from the policy briefing and from colleagues today about how best we can do that. So it's great to see the briefing, really support the recommendations that are there, and fantastic to have a chance to participate today, and looking forward to the rest of the discussion. Thanks very much, Nadas.
Thank you so much, Emily. I think there are a couple of really important points that you've highlighted that can be used as examples. The first is around the point that gender equality can't be achieved until female genital cutting ends. I think sometimes this gets lost, but it's crucial to understanding why FGC needs to be centered in gender equality efforts. And then, of course, the second point is around needing to really listen and be led by the communities that we're supporting, and of course to make sure that there's increased support and resources at that level, because that's where change is going to happen. I want to make sure that we have enough time for our final speaker today. We have one more panelist who I'm really excited about. I'd like to introduce Massoma Ranalvi, who is joining us from Delhi today, Delhi, India, where she's co-founder of We Speak Out, which is a survivor-led organization of women who are committed to eliminating FGM. Massoma, thank you so much for joining us. So we know that FGC is a form of violence against women and girls that is also widely practiced in Asia. In fact, you and I know one another from your role in the Asian Network to End FGMC, which is coordinated by Orchid Project and Arrow. We've heard about the challenges and opportunities of applying a gender transformative approach from some key perspectives today, but we know that different regions and countries call for different nuances. From your experience with We Speak Out and the Asian Network to End FGMC, can you talk about the unique perspectives and challenges of applying this approach to ending FGC in India specifically, and maybe Asia more broadly? Thank you, Massoma, over to you.
Yeah. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much, Nados, for inviting me to this panel. First and foremost, I'm very happy that India and Asia are now part of discussions on FGMC. It's extremely important. This was really not happening a decade ago. As you all know, I come from India, and I am going to be focusing on issues. I mean, a lot of issues have been spoken. There have been so many speakers before me. So I will just focus on a couple of issues specific to India and Asia. Because as Nardo said, the practice is universal, but there are nuances which differ from region to region. The power of religion in the FGMC discourse in Asia is tremendous. It is here that we see men as dominant recipients, interpreters, and transmitters of divine messages, while women have largely remained passive receivers of teachings and are ardent practitioners of religious rituals. In fact, attitudes which have developed around patriarchal interpretations of religious beliefs have defined and shaped the social and cultural norms, context of women in India and Asia, resulting in their disempowerment and second-class status. In India especially, and I've seen this very closely, where politics uses religion as a tool to manipulate masses. And it is here that women bear the brunt of the consequences of cultural attitudes and the impact of religion and politics in their particular milieu. Recognizing the influence of religion and culture on the lives of women is extremely critical to this discourse. Religion controls our thoughts, it determines our norms, mindsets, and attitudes. The problem is religion is not a given. In fact, it is a negotiated reality. While religious structures have a negative impact on victims of sexual violence and abuse, it's the women who have internalized the scriptures and scriptural interpretations which describe women as sinners, manipulators, temptress, and this in turn contributes to their silence on violence and abuse. In all mainstream religions and culture, and I'm talking of all religions, even religions within which there is no FGMC as such, the politics of representation at work is mainly by casting humans in a gendered mold. The definition of masculinity places men at an advantage, while women are defined as weak, sensitive, dependent, and highly disadvantaged. There is a need to break these gender binaries as the power is hegemonic and this prescribes to violence, control, and dominate, and enforce a system of rule and cultural norms which discriminate. The gendering of the body and sexuality does great violence to women. The male is considered the norm. The scriptures are then used to define women as defective or sinful, which in turn leads to controlling them even by using violence. So without altering the mindsets, without questioning some of these religious interpretations, very little can change. A gender transformative approach has to be holistic, and in fact, it is holistic. It perceives the whole gamut of issues of violence, discrimination, much more broadly and meaningfully. And in fact, I think Nardos has kept saying this, it kind of helps us break the silos into which we are kind of been fitted into. And I see this especially in India because, we are literally a minority within a minority talking about this issue. There is, of course, a huge need, in fact, to work with men, with religious leaders, scholars, politicians, and community members alike. We all know it's a long-term call. It will take a long time, but it works. I'd like to give my personal example here. So We Speak Out was formed in 2015. It's been like 6 years of arduous work, sometimes heartbreaking work, but plowing away slowly, one woman at a time, one girl at a time, one boy at a time, questioning the basic principle behind the practice, talking about gender discriminated milieu in which we are all placed, has given results. Today, there are a significant number of boys and girls who understand more than they did earlier, who are willing to question norms which cause harm. And perhaps, to conclude, I think one of the biggest challenges for us still in the subcontinent of Asia is to get our governments and policymakers to listen to us and to join in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Massoma. I think we all have a really long way to go in ending this practice. But the perspectives from Asia are so helpful to hear the centrality of religion in really making sure the practice stays in place. Also, like you said, how do you have a gender transformative approach that operates at multiple levels when you have governments that don't want to acknowledge that the practice is even happening, let alone that it's problematic? So I think you've reminded us that in our efforts to end FGC, the approaches really need to be cognizant of context. And that's why movement building and dialogue within and across religions is so critical. So thank you. We really thought that we would have time for a question and answer session, but we have 1 minute left. And we know that everyone is very busy in different parts of the world, but this is not going to be the first discussion that we have on this. We've heard from panelists whose work sit across the different levels of the socio-ecological model. We've heard from activists, community-based organizations, CSOs, global initiatives, government, and I believe our panelists have really offered some insight into the complex but important interventions that are required at multiple levels for a gender transformative approach to have impact on FGC. What's clear is that the discussion on the most impactful way to apply this approach is still maturing and evolving. So we ask the audience, panelists, and everyone working to end FGC to continue the discussion as openly and as inclusively as possible. I'm pleased to let you know that the full report, the full policy discussion paper that we're launching today is now available at orchidproject.org. Please do have a look, take the time to go through it. The video that we showed at the beginning of the webinar is also available on the website. Very quickly, on behalf of Orchid Project, I would like to express our sincere thanks and gratitude once again to the Wallace Global Fund for supporting this really important piece of work, and to just for being an ally in the fight against FGC. To Dr. Anne-Marie Middelberg for her professionalism, thoughtfulness, and dedication to this paper. To the panelists, Sarian, Amos, Emily, Massoma, for Mireille, for joining us today and sharing their valuable perspectives on a gender transformative approach. We really appreciate you all. And to the grassroots organizations in Africa and in Asia who contributed so generously to the focus group discussions and surveys that contributed to this paper. And finally, to a huge thank you to our wonderful audience who joined us today. While I've been talking, I've been seeing all the conversations going on in the chat, and it's so encouraging and uplifting. And we look forward to further discussions with you all. So thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of the day, and goodbye.